Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Many years ago, I watched Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. I remembered very little except for the robots, which appear at the beginning of the film, but recently I rewatched it and decided I needed to make a military analysis of the film. Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow is a unique and actually very important film. All of the film sets, backgrounds, environments, and robots were made in a computer with CGI. Excluding two of the scenes, no part of Sky Captain was shot on location. Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow introduced the techniques and the technology which made Sin City and 300 possible. The film was not a box office success, however, and I believe this has to do with many elements, including the plot, the characters, the action, and the military flaws. For this video, I am only going to talk about the military flaws and the incompetence existent in this film, which I believe make the characters look stupid and make the suspension of disbelief difficult. Now, as always, I am not going to discuss the incredible feats and the individual heroic acts of the characters. Audiences want heroes who are aspirational and inspirational. What this means in practice is I'm not going to look at various airborne maneuvers and discuss how the Sky Captain wouldn't be able to do that specific move in his aeroplane. However, I will criticise the Sky Captain if he does something in his aeroplane in an effort to accomplish a goal when he could have taken a simpler and far more obvious course of action which would have made his life easier. Alright, let's begin. The film takes place in an alternate version of the 1930s and starts in New York. Various scientists have been disappearing, and Gwyneth Paltrow's character, Tagalong Blonde, is on the case. Why call her Tagalong Blonde? Because not only is the character a blonde, but she is also not plot essential in any sense. She could be written out of the film without any problems. She merely tags along with the Sky Captain, who actually is a plot integral character. While Tagalong Blonde is investigating a lead, a siren sounds, and everyone in New York is told to evacuate the city by megaspeakers. The reason? The city is being attacked by giant robots, and their height easily rivals those of some of the smaller skyscrapers. These huge metal titans don't walk into the city, they fly into the city. I honestly have no idea how they are able to do this. For starters, how they fly is not clearly depicted. They don't have visible jetpacks, for instance. They just seem to float and use electricity as a source of energy. The big question, though, is this. How is a colossal humanoid robot, weighing thousands of tons, supposed to fly without using a tremendous amount of fuel? Even if you could make these things, it wouldn't be cost-effective to use them in a war, due to fuel costs and material costs. The New York police, for reasons I cannot fathom, wastes time setting up a roadblock to stop these robots. It does nothing, of course. They then try shooting the robots with guns. This does about as much as one would expect. Desperate to stop these things, but not having the means to do so, the authorities radio for Sky Captain to save them. Apparently, Sky Captain is literally the first person they call, rather than any of the branches in the US military, such as the National Guard. And so, Sky Captain arrives on the scene, who will henceforth be referred to as Sky Moron, for reasons which will become apparent as the analysis continues. Now, Sky Moron comes alone, which is strange because it is later revealed he has a small mercenary army under his command. However, this solitary appearance by Sky Moron can be explained. Perhaps he was just flying around in his armed P-40 to relax, and he received the message and happened to be nearby. This may seem improbable, but it is possible. Anyway, Sky Moron flies to the rescue, and tries shooting the giants with his plane's machine guns, but this doesn't do anything, so he tries to place a wire in between the buildings to slow them down. It slows them down by a few seconds. He then turns around and goes for another flyover, approaching the robots from the front again. This is when the robots start to fire at him with what I guess are heat rays or rather broad lasers. Sky Moron dodges these and decides to approach them from the rear. Now, let's actually examine the design of these robots, because they seem to be terribly designed for warfare, especially urban warfare. They all seem to have only one heat ray weapon, which is in their heads, and this is where their visual sensors are as well. We can know this for sure because when Sky Moron approaches them from behind, they don't see him. So basically, these robots are blind to anything approaching them from behind or anything running under their legs, because they don't have any optic sensors there, and they have no weapons on the lower ends of their bodies. And this is a problem because infantry. Tagalong Blonde throughout these scenes is just wandering about the legs of these robots. She is only armed with a camera, and is no threat. But what if she was a US soldier armed with large explosives? What if the US military had set up mortars or cannons within the buildings on this street? They would be able to escape detection by the robots and be able to blow off their legs with ease. If a robot somehow did manage to detect teams of infantry deploying large bombs or mines next to their legs and wanted to vaporize them with its heat ray, the robot would have to bend over to target the infantry, because the robots don't have necks which could adjust the heads to target the ground. This would take a relatively long amount of time, and these robots look top-heavy. It is doubtful they would be able to bend over to target the ground without falling over. These robots are just too tall to detect infantry on the ground next to their feet, with only one sensor in their heads. An easy fix to this design problem would be to build more sensors with smaller heat rays in the torso of these robots. Or one could completely redesign the robots and make them shorter, so they could detect any infantry who might try to attack their legs. There is actually a historical parallel of an armoured vehicle which, although good at destroying tanks, was vulnerable to infantry, and so suffered from the same weaknesses as these robots. The Ferdinand Tank Destroyer, or Panzerjäger. The first batch of these vehicles first saw action at the Battle of Kursk during Operation Citadel. The Ferdinands destroyed Russian tanks with ease. However, due to the poor visibility inside the Ferdinands and the lack of an anti-infantry machine gun, Russian infantry, when they managed to close in on the tank destroyers, were able to destroy them with grenades and Molotov cocktails without too much difficulty. Whenever I look at these robotic behemoths, I can't help but conclude they would have the same weaknesses as the Ferdinands in World War II. Sky Moron actually proves my point here by exploiting the blind spots inherent in this robot design. He flies undetected between the legs of these robots and drops a bomb on one of the robot's ankles. This blows off one of the legs and the robot falls to the ground and seems to break upon impact. Before Sky Moron can exploit these weaknesses again, all the robots fly off. Now for some observations. First, we later learn in the film that these robots are going after resources, such as electric generators, because the villain needs them for his project. Second, we later see the robots return to New York City to take the generators, which were underneath the pavement. Third, the robots had already started to collect the generators before they were called back. Fourth, other than Sky Moron, there was no real resistance in New York City. Fifth, it doesn't matter what energy source is powering these robots, a tremendous amount of energy would be needed to power these things. So, bearing all of these 5 observations in mind, why were these robots called back? They had only just started the process of collecting the generators. Why didn't the villain wait until these robots had finished their job? It would make sense for him to wait, because of the 4th and 5th observations, which are, there was no resistance in the city worth talking about, and the robots had to be using great amounts of energy to move. What if the US military decided to fortify New York and prepare for their return? Well, the robots wouldn't have such an easy job collecting the generators. In fact, they might not be able to collect the generators if the army was properly coordinated and determined. Why just assume that you'll be able to send your robots back to the city without opposition? The robots aren't opposed when they do go back in the film, but no leader or villain worth his salt would give his enemies the chance to prepare if he could help it. And in this case, the villain would certainly help himself by just waiting a few more hours. And finally, the energy consumption. Because the villain decided to pull back his robots before they had finished their job in New York, he makes his robots take 4 journeys to complete the operation. 2 journeys to New York, and 2 journeys back to the base. This is a tremendous waste of fuel and energy, as well as time. It would be far more efficient to make just 2 journeys, 1 to New York and 1 back to base. This is just basic logistics. The resistance in New York was pitiful. There was no reason to retreat before the job was done. Because they did retreat, fuel and energy were wasted. Speaking of retreat, when the robots leave the city for the first time, I am led to assume they are heading to some secret base, not too far away from New York. Perhaps in the North Atlantic Sea somewhere. They can't be heading to the villain's main base, which is either in the Indian Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, because that would be too far for these robots to travel both to and from, without there being numerous bases for refueling purposes, and surely the villain is not so stupid as to waste fuel like that. But anyway, they are retreating somewhere, and yet Sky Moron does not follow them. Why doesn't he? Surely knowing where the robots came from is important. Why didn't he chase after them and at least try to discover where their base might be. If Sky Moron followed them and found their secret forward base, which they were using for their attacks on New York City, he could inform the US military so they could launch an assault, or he could summon his own mercenary army to attack the base. Or he and the US military could work together and attack it. But instead of chasing after these robots to decide where they came from, he admires Tagalong Blonde instead. Now it turns out New York was not the only city which was attacked. Cities all over the globe were visited by the Flying Titans, as well as some burrowing ones. The US military, the British military, the French military, etc. in this alternate timeline are actually quite pathetic, and don't have the resources or hardware to deal with the menace, and so hire Sky Moron and his sizable band of mercenaries to deal with the problem.
Meanwhile, with military resources stretched thin across the globe, world leaders must once again call upon the elite mercenary forces of Sky Captain and his army for hire to uncover the meaning of these mysterious events.
I hope I don't have to explain why the Western nations have screwed up somewhere in terms of their military preparations if they need to hire Sky Captain. Emphasis on need. It would be a good idea to hire him even if they did have the resources. Although, having said all this, the British military later in this film seems to be doing alright. Well, the Royal Navy at least. Anyhow, for the next 10 minutes, nothing that important happens, although the name of the villain, Professor Totenkopf, is learnt along with some other details. Totenkopf is an evil German scientist who controls all the robots and speaks with a perfect English accent.
A world consumed by hatred and bent on self-destruction. Watch as we have taken what was to be a paradise and failed in our responsibilities as its steward. I know now that the course the human race has...
This makes sense. So let's jump to the next battle scene. Sky Moron and Tagalong Blonde arrive back at Sky Captain Island and are told by a junior officer that their reconnaissance has picked something up on radar headed their way. Sky Moron asks when they will arrive, and then they see these airborne robots coming from the clouds. Serious question. If everyone at base knew something was coming, why weren't all the pilots scrambling to get in their planes to defend the island? Why did these idiots do nothing but wait for Sky Moron to get back so they could tell him that they were about to be attacked? Does no one have any common sense or initiative on this island? Because the pilots did not scramble to their planes, they are all destroyed while they are still on the airstrip. Only Sky Moron's plane remains due to this lack of competence and initiative. Sky Moron takes off with Tagalong Blonde in the back, and does his best to defend the base. Then Dex, the corporate suit from James Cameron's Avatar, contacts Sky Moron and tells him one of these bird machines is receiving and sending radio signals from and to evil German scientist Totenkopf's base. Dex tells Sky Moron not to shoot the bird machines, and says he needs him to follow the one which is broadcasting the signal, so he can analyse the signals back at the base, which is still under heavy assault, and pinpoint the area these machines are coming from. Now, before someone says that this was the reason the planes weren't in the air fighting the bird machines, because Dex didn't want the machine transmitting the signal taken down, I have an objection. If the plan was not to fight in order to track the signal from one of these machines, then why on earth didn't Dex and the rest of the officers order that all the planes and military hardware be taken to a safe location where they wouldn't be destroyed? If the official order was not to destroy any of these bird machines, then why did the anti-air defense turrets pop out of the ground and start blasting these machines out of the sky? The only thing which explains this is military incompetence and / bad writing. The bird machine starts to head towards New York City, and Sky Moron sets off in pursuit, but he is chased by several flying machines. There isn't really much to talk about in this sequence, except for a few smaller things. The bird machine, which is broadcasting the signal, starts flying in between the buildings in an attempt to lose Sky Moron. Rather than fly above the buildings and the city to get a good view and see where this machine is flying, Sky Moron, following the advice of Tagalong Blonde, decides to fly through the streets of the city to chase after it. To explicate, he flies a plane through the streets of New York, making sharp turns and getting lost because Tagalong Blonde doesn't know the city as well as she boasts. I know Sky Moron is a great pilot and is capable of these maneuvers, but surely this is a good way to lose track of the bird machine rather than to keep track of it. Also, why is New York filled with cars and pedestrians? The city was attacked only a few days ago by a small robot army. Why hasn't everyone fled in terror? Why aren't the streets deserted? Anyhow, Sky Moron manages to keep chase with the bird machine, bounces the signal back to Dex, who then writes down the location of the signal on the map. But alas, he is captured and taken by the machines. Sky Moron arrives back at his base, which has been completely rubbished. Somehow, he and Tagalong Blonde don't notice the tall machines in the hangar and get spotted. Sky Moron shoots one with his pistol. That's a massive weak spot right there. It makes me wonder why these machines aren't armed with guns, because let's imagine these robots have to fight some normal soldiers to acquire materials for their master. Presumably, any bullets which hit their metal bodies will just bounce off, but as we have seen, a bullet from a sidearm can pierce the optics window and disable the robot. So now imagine a line of riflemen, supported by machine guns, and imagine these robots trying to get in range with their arms so they can rip them apart. Something tells me that most of these robots wouldn't be able to get in range in actual battle, because with so many bullets flying through the air, some at least would smash through those glass windows. Just before the robots can tear them, limb from limb, or capture them, the signal orders that they head back to base. How convenient. Hang on 1 minute, this robot right here is depicted as having more autonomy and independence than the others we see in this film. She/it is sent on a secret mission to try and retrieve these 2 metal sticks, which turn out to be vials, from Dr. Jennings, whom we see earlier in the film. She/it actually sees Sky Moron but doesn't try to capture or kill him. Surely the reason Sky Captain Island was attacked was because evil German scientist Totenkopf thinks Sky Moron has those vials. Those same vials which are essential to his plan to send a massive rocket into outer space for another world. Why wouldn't any of these robots spend the extra time to search him for those instruments? Why aren't their orders different? Why are they not allowed the extra time to search Sky Moron since he showed up? By the way, we actually know Totenkopf's robots were searching for these vials because it is even shown and stated in the film.
He was looking for something.
Anyway, the useless machines head off, and Sky Moron and Tagalong Blonde find the map piece where Dex drew the location of the controlling signal. It came from somewhere in Nepal. So Sky Moron and Tagalong Blonde fly to Nepal by themselves. This doesn't make any sense to me. Sky Moron's mercenaries didn't all die. A number of them evacuated the island and left Dex behind to pinpoint the signal.
Dex! We can't hold him off any longer!
I'm almost there.
We have to evacuate now!
Go ahead without me, I'm right behind you.
Why did Sky Moron not decide to take the remainder of his army with him? I can hear an answer to this question from some audience members. Well, Your Imperial Majesty, there could be 2 possible reasons. The first could be that Sky Moron wasn't able to find transport for these men. And the second could be that he didn't want to waste time finding transport because he wants to save Dex quickly. While these are nice suggestions, they aren't really good reasons for Sky Moron's decision here. Let's address the first possible reason. I find it really hard to believe that Sky Moron doesn't have the money, resources, or connections to acquire aircraft to transport at least some of his surviving men with him. He seems rich and respected. If he asked the US government for some form of transport plane, they would likely give it to him. Now let's address the second possible reason, which I think is a far better explanation for his actions here. While there is a solid truth to it, after all, time is of the essence, and the additional time you spend preparing and travelling is time given to your enemy for his dastardly schemes, there is one problem with this decision. That problem is manpower. Tagalong Blonde only has a camera, and doesn't know how to fight, so Sky Moron is effectively going by himself. Question: if he discovers Totenkopf's base and finds Dex alive, how is he supposed to stop the evil German scientist and rescue Dex by himself? I know Sky Moron is good at his job and is insanely lucky, but come on, this is just arrogance. He would stand a much better chance at stopping Totenkopf and rescuing his friend if he had what remained of his army with him. It would be worth making the extra preparations and spending the extra time to transport the rest of his forces to Nepal to face evil German scientist Totenkopf. Going by himself with Tagalong Blonde is not a suicide mission. It is a death wish. Besides, later in the film, he needs help from the British Royal Navy to even get into evil German scientist Totenkopf's base, so my point here about additional manpower is vindicated in the last act of the film. Anyway, they reach Nepal and discover that the signal comes from a part of Tibet. It turns out Totenkopf's base is not there, so it would appear that Totenkopf has a radio tower set up somewhere in that region to control his robots without revealing the location of his main base. A commendable decision and strategy. In the course of the film, Sky Moron and Tagalong Blonde don't actually find the radio tower, but they do find an old mine of uranium. Stuff goes down and Tagalong Blonde gives Totenkopf's agents the vials.
Let her go.
Give me the vials and the girl will live.
What vials? What are you talking about?
I will not ask a second time. Drop the gun.
I told you I don't know what you're talking about. You'll just have to kill us.
Sky Moron, why are you so dense? Shenanigans. They wake up in a beautiful secret valley, and are pointed in the direction of evil German scientist Totenkopf's actual base. Unfortunately, the best character in the film does not accompany Sky Moron and Tagalong Blonde to the base. It turns out, evil German scientist Totenkopf's base is located on an island in the Pacific or Indian Ocean. The film never actually says where the isle is. Sky Moron's plane doesn't have enough fuel to reach the island, so he contacts a friend in the Royal Navy, who moves her Mobile Reconnaissance Airbase, which is a flying aircraft carrier. I wonder whether Joss Whedon watched this film, to a rendezvous so he can refuel. On the question of fuel, I don't know how the aircraft carrier refuels, or what fuel it even uses. Let's assume this thing could actually fly for a minute. Imagine how much fuel it would use. The only way I could see this flying is if it had a nuclear engine, and even then, I am not convinced it would be worth the money and the time creating such a thing. A normal aircraft carrier would be much cheaper, much less delicate, and would be just as effective. Also, it turns out Sky Moron's friend, whom I shall name Cyclops, is a commander rather than a captain, which is strange. It would make more sense if the most senior rank on this flying aircraft carrier was that of captain rather than commander. Also, it's the 1930s, and the Royal Navy allowed a woman not only to join in a fighting capacity, but also to get promoted to the rank of commander? Anyway, while Sky Moron is getting his plane refueled, the flying aircraft carrier, which is called Manta Station, and also referred to as a carrier, is attacked by evil German scientist Totenkopf. Missiles are shown flying from both the island and Totenkopf's submarines, and Cyclops says that getting to the island via the air is not possible, but she says there is an underwater tunnel, which will take Sky Captain to the centre of the island. So Sky Moron and the British fighter planes dive into the waters and set out for the tunnel, and spend their time dodging torpedoes from large crab robots and fooling sunken ships. They then reach the underwater inlet to the island, but it is guarded by the king of the crab robots, which somehow manages to survive at least a dozen torpedoes with no damage whatsoever, which isn't believable. The King Crab robot fires a salvo of torpedoes at Sky Moron's plane, which he has lost control of, but Cyclops manages to draw the attention of the torpedoes, are they heat-seeking? And dives towards the King Crab robot, intending to crash her plane and the following torpedoes into it. Cyclops ejects before the impact. However, since she wouldn't have enough time to reach a safe distance at the moment she ejected, she would have died here. She of course doesn't, but she would have. With the King Crab robot destroyed, Sky Moron and Tagalong Blonde move through the inlet and emerge in a river on the island. So let us assess this assault team, which has the joint objectives of stopping evil German scientist Totenkopf along with his army of robots, and rescuing Dex. This assault team consists of Sky Moron and Tagalong Blonde. Even though Cyclops knew evil German scientist Totenkopf was on the island, and even though she and all the fighters on her carrier joined him under the waters, none of them joined Sky Moron as a member of an assault team. Cyclops had no intention of landing a force on the island to stop Totenkopf at that point. On the one hand, this is an intelligent move. Evil German scientist Totenkopf and his army are quite dangerous, and because many flying aircraft carriers appear at the end of the film, it appears Cyclops called for reinforcements to attempt a proper assault on the island. A very good move. However, if Cyclops' idea was to wait for reinforcements and attempt a proper, coordinated assault. Why did she risk the lives of her pilots, getting Sky Moron and Tagalong Blonde onto the island? Why didn't she just say to Sky Moron, "Now look here, I know you want to save Dex, and I know you want to kill Totenkopf, but we don't stand a chance against his machines unless we wait for reinforcements and then attempt a full-scale invasion. Please don't do anything reckless. Wait until the rest of the Royal Navy gets here, and then we can attack the island." It's important to note here that none of our heroes knows about the rocket, and while Sky Moron and Tagalong Blonde know something about a countdown, it is never mentioned to Cyclops, so there would appear to be no reason to rush an assault. To Cyclops, time would appear to be on their side. So why did Cyclops risk the lives of her own pilots, and she surely lost a few here, just to help two people get on the island who are not members of the British military? Why waste men and hardware for such a pointless thing? If Sky Moron and Tagalong Blonde weren't the film's protagonists, they would surely die and achieve nothing. And even if we assume that off-camera Cyclops was told about the countdown, and assume that Sky Moron and Tagalong Blonde are worried about running out of time, it still doesn't make any sense. If our heroes were convinced they were running out of time, and if Cyclops was convinced they were running out of time, why wouldn't she send a strike team with Sky Moron and Tagalong Blonde? So that makes no sense. But perhaps Sky Moron and Tagalong Blonde are prepared. Like super prepared. I'm sure they have armed themselves to the teeth so they can do a covert search and destroy mission, and it turns out that Sky Moron just brought his revolver, Dex's ray gun, and a machete. Tagalong Blonde is even worse. She still just has her camera, which can only take 2 photographs. Why aren't they armed with rifles, submachine guns, explosives, and other weapons which might be useful against machines? Sky Moron doesn't even bring his second pistol, a semi-automatic, that we see in the uranium mine earlier in the film. He only brings one of his sidearms. Why? Also, he quickly loses this said sidearm. This is the most poorly equipped assault team I have seen in a film. I would not have much hope if these two were trying to rescue me from an island full of hostile robots. Alright, so in the ending act of the film there are no more battles or military elements to analyse. From here on out, everything action related falls into the category of individual heroics, and as a rule I do not question or critique the ability to perform said individual heroics in my military analysis videos. Although I will say the fight scene between Sky Moron and the robot assassin is boring and badly choreographed. I might have to make a video dedicated to criticising it, but what do I think of this film really? I'll be honest, the designs of the robots, the aeroplanes, the flying aircraft carriers, and the weird technology don't bother me in the slightest. Yes, I think most of the robots in this film are poorly designed from a military point of view, and wouldn't be as dangerous as presented. And yes, I think my boring points about engines and fuel consumption are valid, but these aren't the film's main problems. In fact, these diesel punk machines and contraptions give the film a great charm, and are a strength. However, there are problems with the incompetence of the military characters in this film, including the Sky Captain. The characters don't seem to know what they are doing or how to fight effectively. Watching the junior officer tell Sky Captain that hostiles had been detected on radar, and seeing that no one was getting in his plane to fight, and then watching Totenkopf's drones destroy them, was eye-roll inducing. Watching a commanding officer in the Royal Navy risk the lives of her men and the loss of Royal Navy hardware to get 2 lonely and woefully unprepared individuals on an immensely dangerous island where they would likely die was mind-boggling. Watching a crab robot somehow shrug off a dozen torpedo hits with no damage wasn't believable in the slightest, even if it was a king among crab robots. There should have been some signs of damage. But truth be told, like with all the other films I have analysed, the military incompetence isn't the film's biggest problem. I might have to make another video on Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow, talking about the writing, because it is everything else which really fails the film. The story, the plot, the action, and the characters are the real problems in this film. It is funny to say this, but unlike the other films I have analysed on this channel, the action in this film just wasn't very engaging. As much as I dislike the tactical and strategic incompetence found in The Last Jedi, The Battle of the Five Armies, etc., the action in those films is fun, especially when you ignore any of the tactical elements. If you switch your brain off, as it were, you can enjoy it. I tried to enjoy the action in Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow for what it was, but I just couldn't do it. The action just wasn't engaging, and for an action-adventure film, that is bad. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all have an excellent day.